He is a man that wears many hats. He is a musician, composer, musical director, musical engineer, and producer. He started his professional music career playing and writing for bands at the young age of 16. His knack for the piano keys started it all for this man. His name is Bruce Lee. Bruce's career spans over 30 years, which has brought along many awards. He has written and produced well over 1,000 hours of musical scores for children's television, other drama series, and film. Bruce doesn't stop there. He's a founding member of blues band Trouble and Strife and just recently formed his own jazz ensemble called the Bruce Lee Trio. Join me, Melissa Morris, as I talk one-on-one with Bruce Lee right after this break. Welcome to this edition of One-on-One. I'm your host, Melissa Morris, and joining us today is musician Bruce Lee. Thank you so much for joining us today, Bruce.
My pleasure.
You are a man of many talents. You are a musician, a composer, musical engineer, musical director, producer, so much more. But of course, the theme through all this is music. Yeah. When did your passion for music come about? Were you very young?
Well, I started playing piano. I saw a piano. And I told my parents I'd like to play it, and so they bought me a piano, and then they made me take lessons, which I didn't like at all. I saw the kids going off with the baseball bats and the gloves, and I'd have to practice, and I really hated it. But when I was about 16, somebody came up to me and asked me if I wanted to play in a band. That had never crossed my mind before. And so I said sure, and I played bass in the band. And we practiced, and then we had a concert at a high school auditorium, and we got out on stage and played sort of the first couple chords, and all the girls screamed, and that was it. I was hooked.
That's an easy thing to get hooked by.
Absolutely. It was great. And at first, playing in bands was really kind of about getting girls. That's really what it was about. But at a certain point, the music really kicked in, and I just fell in love with it. I don't know, I must have been playing in a band for maybe a year and a half or something, and it just became kind of like heaven to me.
Did you feel different on stage? Did you feel like you were sort of taking on a persona, or was it just you enhanced?
Oh, at first I pretended to be somebody else, for sure.
Yeah.
But that stopped a long time ago.
Right, right. Well, you grew up in Hamilton.
Yeah.
How do you feel that your family was behind you musically? Do you think they sort of helped you through your career or supported you in any way?
Yeah. My mom and dad were always pleased when things were going well. And in the earlier years when it was really difficult, they would take care of me a little bit when I needed some help. Yeah, they helped me.
And you were mentioning that you were playing in bands at a very young age. Do you think this helped you through your career, whether it was understanding music or working with other people? Do you think that helped you move along to the career that you have now?
Sure, yeah. In those days, you could play every night of the week, and I did. I played every night of the week for about 6 years. And so you'd play, 4 hours a night, and then you'd have a matinee on Wednesday generally, and a matinee on Saturday, and then you'd probably stay in the same town for maybe 2 or 3 weeks and then move on. And so you played a lot of music, and you get better. That's why bands used to be really good. It's not so much that way anymore. Mostly what we hear is studio stuff, whereas, if you listen to the records back in the late 60s or 70s, mid 70s, up to about 1980, I guess, the bands performed all the time, and so they were really good.
Yeah, they got to honing their craft almost.
Yeah, they were a band as opposed to a studio production or something.
Right, right. Well, bring us now into your 20s. You were playing in a couple of house bands. Tell us about that with some of the TV things you were doing.
Oh, that was a little later, actually. I was playing in a band, and somebody heard me play in a recording studio in Toronto, an owner of a studio, a fellow named Art Snyder. And he had, I think, the first recording studio in Canada, actually, which is first private one. And it was getting a little long in the tooth at this point, but he liked me, and he hired me, and he gave me, he didn't actually pay me, he gave me an apartment and, you know, enough money for food and a car, and just wanted me to be at the studio every day. And then I produced, and I did a little engineering, and I didn't sweep the floor. But I wrote charts, you know, I did some conducting, and I really learned about working in the studio from him. I did that for about 3 or 4 years in my, I guess, early 20s. And that led on to a whole kind of career as a studio musician. Back in those days, the studios were busy. There were lots of studios in Toronto. And I could work, maybe play 2 or 3 jingles in the course of a day, and then you'd play on a record in, you know, in the afternoon or something or other. And then projects kind of came along, and I started to write. People recognized that I could write instead of just play. And so I got doing that. And arranging, I did a lot of arranging and that sort of thing. It was all okay.
Yeah, well, and of course, you were talking about jingles. You actually were really on the forefront of some new technologies. You were the first person to bring in the Fairlight computer system when you had your business inside the City TV building in Toronto.
Yeah.
Tell us about what the response was to a system like that, and how that sort of changed the course of that industry.
Well, you know, looking back at it now, I'm really unhappy it happened, to tell you the truth. The Fairlight was the first sampling instrument, which is where you know, I guess everybody knows what sampling is. And it changed the course of music. All of a sudden, bass players didn't work anymore. That was the first thing you could sample pretty well. Drums were gone. String players, horn players were gone. You know, eventually everybody was gone. And we have the mess we have now with no recording studio, or everybody's got sort of a little project studio. There are no real studios left with the exception, well, there's a couple in Toronto, but just a couple. And it's a sad thing. It's a sad thing. It's very difficult for a musician to make a good living now. It used to be a respectable profession.
Yeah. Well, we're going to talk more about the future of the music industry, and also, of course, about your career, Bruce, when we come back here on One on One. Welcome back to this edition of One on One, where today we are joined by musician Bruce Lee. Bruce, thank you so much again for being with us today. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the scores that you've done for film and television. You've done well over 1,000 hours of scoring for film and television, and you were nominated for an Academy Award for one of your projects, The Painted Door. When you were nominated for an Academy Award, how does that feel? What was that experience like for you?
Well, it was the film that was nominated, and it was really exciting. It was really, it was actually one of the first, maybe the 3rd or 4th film that I'd scored. And it was just a great feeling. I really felt like I had arrived, you know? It was nice. It was a lovely feeling. Very exciting.
I can imagine. I can imagine. And of course, speaking of nominations, you were also nominated for a Genie Award. That was for marionettes. How did you get involved in that project?
I'd been working for Atlantis, as it was called at that time. I was doing, at that point, kind of all of their work. They were small, had a little office on Queen Street, and not Queen, sorry, on Church, and it was a kind of a funny kind of horror movie. It was I believe it was 90 minutes, and it was for TV, and it was Dom DeLuise, and I didn't think that he was a scary guy. Right. So I wrote a score that I thought was pretty tongue-in-cheek. It was kind of scary, but with a lot of humor, much like an Alfred Hitchcock kind of thing might have been, I thought. And the parent company, the partner to Atlantis on this, was Fox. And so they sent it down to Fox, and everybody had said, "Oh man, this is great, this is the best score." And they were real happy, and I felt really great. And then Fox came along and said, "We hate this. It's supposed to be real serious and scary. So I had to go back and rescore some scenes.
Really?
And I was really unhappy about having to do that. And then I sort of forgot about the whole thing and moved on to other things, and then I got this, this nomination. It was very weird.
Oh, that's great.
Very weird. And I was afraid that if I won, I might say something
to that effect.
So it was a very funny award ceremony.
Oh,
very weird. I was really of two minds with that.
Yeah, yeah.
With the Academy Award, I hoped it would win, but with the other one, with the Genie, I wasn't sure because I was just afraid of what I might do.
Right. Well, about 10 years ago, you decided that guitar was something that you were going to take up with your friend Larry Kurtz, and you started a blues band with him. Tell me how the band has evolved over the last 10 years that it's been in existence.
Well, I had just bought a Stratocaster. We were talking about Stratocasters a little earlier. And it was my first electric guitar, and it was either that or a motorcycle. I don't know. I just needed to do something. And so I bought the electric guitar, and I really liked it. And I had played with some great players in my career. I played some of the best players in the world. So I knew what I wanted to do with the guitar. And I just started to do it. And my wife said she knew somebody who had a little kind of practice band. And eventually I said, okay, well, let's go. I'll go have some fun. And so I did, and they let me play with them, which was great. And they were terrific guys in the band, and they were really dedicated to playing blues. And so that was good for me. And after a little while, we played a gig. And it's a funny thing. We went and we played, and everybody kind of looked at us, and we were all kind of old and scruffy looking. And so they thought we were real, like they thought we knew what we were doing, right? And it's been kind of like that all along. Everybody kind of takes us seriously.
That's great.
Now, over the last 10 years, I've kind of got my act together. I'm not a great guitar player, but I can run the band really well, kind of like Keith,
Yeah.
And Larry has become quite a good harmonica player. He's really pretty good, and we both sing, kind of.
And your son's in the band too.
Yeah,
What's
that's
that
a blast. Well, he's great. He's a real musician. When he was young, he said he wanted to play and he wanted some advice, and I told him to close his eyes and play. Just close your eyes and play. Don't learn anything. Just play. And he took that to heart, and he'll play anything. He can play anything. It's amazing. He has no fear.
Yeah.
And he's like a real virtuoso guitar player. Yeah, it's so cool. The first night he played with the band, people just kind of stood up and cheered after he played his first solo, and part of it was because he was kind of young and good looking and all that kind of stuff, But after a while, that wears off, and they still kept cheering every time he played. So
excellent. Well, we're going to hear more about your family and more about the band as well when we come back with Bruce Lee right here on One on One. Welcome back to One on One, where today we are joined by musician Bruce Lee. Bruce, I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the other items that has recently been added to your resume, or maybe not so recently, but that is writing for children's television shows. How is it for you to start writing for such a completely different demographic?
Oh, music's music. It's all the same. I haven't, it's been a while since I've done that. But for a while, I was the guy. I did Sesame Street and, a lot of those shows. And I always felt when my kids were young, if they were listening to Mozart or something like that, they were real happy in the cribs. And if they were listening to real abrasive stuff, then it got them all agitated, I never ever felt you were supposed to write down to children. I think that's a really wrong approach. I know a lot of people do, a lot of people make fun of it, but I've never felt that way. I always thought it was, kids are kind of closer to God, They're, and they deserve to hear what's really kind of heavenly, as it were. If that makes any kind of sense.
It does. It's a really nice way to put it.
Yeah.
Really nice way to put it. Your friend Larry Kurtz has described you as a very versatile artist, the kind of artist that can move very easily from blues to jazz to other kinds of music. And you do it very well, obviously. What are your thoughts on that, and how do you feel that you're able to do that?
Well, I've just had a lot of experience. I didn't know anything about cowboy music, but I was playing, like a lot of recording sessions, and a guitar player that I had worked with about 3 days earlier called me up and asked me if I would like to play on the Ronnie Prophet show, which was a long-running television show. And I played for about 7 years doing that show as the piano player, and it was every week it was on TV. And so we'd back up all kinds of really great people from Nashville, but I knew nothing about cowboy music, nothing at all.
And you're talking like high-profile Nashville artists, like Winona Judd, and these are big. Tanya
Dolly
Tucker.
Parton and Tanya Tucker,
amazing.
all that kind of stuff. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
It was great. And they were really unpretentious people. That was a real nice thing. It was really different from the rock and roll people I'd been hanging around with.
Is it a different kind of, not as much ego, or what do you think the difference is?
Well, I mean, you're going to have your jerks, but but by and large, they were country people.
Yeah.
And they had different attitudes about things.
Yeah, different attitudes towards their fans too, isn't it? I really appreciate
really appreciate their fans. And you would have guys that had a hit record, in 1960, and they would play 300 days a year, and people would come to see them. People are real. Unless you make a real big mistake in country music, people are quite loyal.
And it's back to what you said about playing. These people were playing 300 days a year, so that makes a big difference.
Right. Yeah, and the same thing with Tommy Hunter. The Tommy Hunter show was the same sort of thing. And so anyway, about the versatility, the thing is, I've been really lucky that, I would be doing something and somebody would say, well, I think you can do something else, and I would sort of apprentice in that, and then I'd become kind of knowledgeable about it. So that's how come.
Who would you say are your mentors or your inspirations?
John Coltrane, Miles Davis, Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, and then there's some real composers. There's a fellow who helped me out quite a bit in Toronto. There's a Czech composer named Milan Kimlicka, and he really helped me a lot. I've lost touch with Milan, but he was an encounter with a serious musician who was working in the studios, as opposed to the rest of us who were all kind of, fly-by-nights. He was the real thing, and he was very inspirational to me. You need to meet people like that. You need to have people that really care about their work.
Yeah.
So he was a real inspiration to me.
Yeah, and it's a different perspective too.
Absolutely.
I would think. Yeah. We're going to talk lots more with you. We have lots more to get to after the break, but we're going to take a quick one right here on One on One. Welcome back to One on One, where today we are joined by musician Bruce Lay. Bruce, we've been talking a lot about music, and obviously it's a huge passion for you. But other than music, what are you passionate about?
Church.
Really?
Yeah. A while ago, my wife used to be a television producer, and then we had kids, and she was a mother. And as the kids have gotten older, she went back to school, and she asked me, what should I take? And I said, well, look about God, figure out about God. So she went to seminary. She took my advice. That's not very often that happens. And she went to seminary, and she's a minister now. And I love our little church. I just love our little church. I love playing in our little church. I love the whole thing. I really do. So.
Does it? Does church inspire your music?
I've played in really big situations. I've played in crummy little situations, and I've played with screaming fans and people throwing beer bottles at me all over the place. But I've never played anything like what it's like in church. It's a beautiful place to play music.
Yeah.
People are there for a different reason. It's really nice. Yeah. And also, I guess the thing is with church now, people are there because they want to be, as opposed to it's what they're supposed to do.
Absolutely.
So it's quite different. It's really lovely. I don't know if that was a good thing to talk about, but
Oh, absolutely it is. Tell us a little bit about your trio, your jazz trio.
That's a real passion of mine right now. All the time I was doing the studio work, I had this fake book at home with 300 or 400 songs in it, and I always wanted to play them, and I'd sort of mess around with them, but I really didn't know what I was doing. And a couple of years ago, a friend of mine had said, let's get together and do some playing, and I know a drummer who'd be good, and so we just started working through these things, and now I'm out playing a lot, and it's great fun. With the blues band, to a certain degree, and with the jazz band now, it's completely improvisational. We play ahead, but other than that, it's totally improvisational. And I think all the years of composition and studio work and all that kind of stuff, it's finally settled me where I can do that now, and I just love it. I never know what's going to happen.
Well, yeah, it must be sort of like a new gig every single time you pick up the instrument.
Every time you play a song, it's a different song. You play the same song, it's got the same title, but it doesn't sound anything like it did before. It's great.
Do you play in this area?
Yeah, quite often.
Yeah.
Quite often.
Yeah. What do you like about living in Dufferin County? Why did you settle here?
Well, I was born on the edge of a forest and lived there and spent a lot of time in Muskoka in my youth, always around the forest, and then I moved to Toronto for all this work and went back and forth to Los Angeles a little bit, and I was not real good with city life. I thought I liked it at the time, but eventually I kept waking up and realizing that no matter how far I went, it was going to be cement. And it drove me crazy. So eventually we packed up and moved out. We moved to Caledon first, and then not the town, but we had a place in the country in Caledon. And then we moved up, and I lived right on the edge of a forest in an old stone house on a dead end road that's dirt. And we have a river and a forest and deer and all that kind of stuff. It's great. I just love it.
And what are you working on now?
Well, mostly the jazz trio. And the Trouble and Strife thing. The Trouble and Strife is interesting because it's been 10 years and we're starting to play some pretty good jobs, and the jazz trio is kind of the same thing. It's coming along really well. Yeah. So I guess those are my interests at this point in my life.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. That's great. Well, it was so nice to meet you and talk to you today, and we're looking forward to hopefully catching a performance of either the trio or Trouble and Strife in the near future. I certainly will. It was very nice talking to you, and thank you so much for joining us here today on One on One. I'm your host, Melissa Morris. We'll see you next time.
One on One was taped on location at the Millcroft Inn and Spa, which features award-winning dining and accommodations and state-of-the-art European-style spa.